So just trying to put an element of reality while we're working in this direction, it's not a definitive path by any means. And that's why I label it as a pathfinder, because certainly there's clear reason to do this. We have to demonstrate the benefit, okay, and how the links are being made and who the user bases are. That goes into the transition plan under the cost-benefit analysis, if you will. And so that's one thing that this group can work towards, while also trying to figure out how do we coalesce about what are the elements and how we go about identifying those elements that will be incorporated into whatever NOAA chooses or has the resources to do. The best chance that we have, I believe, is if we configure whatever it is that the West Coast Model Phase 2 is going to do, that it has multiple, it supports a multiple of the foci of NOAA's ecological forecasting roadmap. And these were the hypoxia, the pathogens, the harmful algal blooms, and habitats. But also I think we need to keep in mind supporting marine fisheries, which is a different flavor. So the fundamental pieces that bring us to those paths, we need to figure out how do we integrate those into the biogeochemical capacity. And that's kind of why I made that cartoon slide that was in my presentation right towards the end. So I'm hearing a lot of wonderful things are going on. I'm not sure how to coalesce the different pieces, so I'm looking for input there. I kind of look a bit to IOOS, in particular the CompT effort, as a way of figuring out what are the strengths and the weaknesses. But I think when we look at the strengths and the weaknesses, we need to have the traceability that towards NOAA's objectives if we're looking at transitions. And that the traceability would be how well do they support or contribute to improving or providing a capability to do the ecological forecasts for those focus areas that I mentioned.
Now, I know
so
Becky,
those are just kind of,
Becky wanted to say something about COMT. Maybe we should let her jump in here.
Yeah, come on, Becky, I'm interested.
Hi. Hi, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thanks. I don't know everybody that's on the line exactly. I'm not sure who's here, but I know we've got a good group. And so some of you may be more or less familiar with the CompT, but I just wanted to just take a couple minutes because Eric mentioned it just recently and also at the beginning of the day. And some of our speakers were talking from work that they're doing in the CompT and some not. So it's really helpful for me to hear about all the work that's happening both in and out of the CompT, because I still I'm not always able to explain that best what's happening in the CompT and why. But I do want to talk about the testbed as a avenue or a platform for transition. And so one thing that happened, and people may or may not quite understand all the parts and pieces, probably Eric is the only one that has most of the pieces together, but the CompT spun up and we had a West Coast component of the testbed, one West Coast project, and has been leading that effort, but it's both a physical model, the analysis he's been doing to figure out what makes best for the WCOFS model, and then also the biogeochemical work that Chris and Yi and some of the others talked about this afternoon. But there is also work that's happening outside of that along the West Coast that's not necessarily tied into CompT, and maybe it should be more. And so I'm not sure exactly how to facilitate that, because I think it's all of the same, not the same people, but I think all of you guys are talking to each other, which is great. But I just want to figure out the best way to make sure CompT represents the work that's happening and helps with the transition. I apologize for the small child in the background. But I guess what I want to say is CompT is there. It is intended to be a transition platform. Projects that were selected in the last round of funding, which was in FY13. We're getting ready for the next round of funding, which will be in FY18. And the idea is that we would try to align projects that come into the test bed with what NOAA needs for transition. So if they're in the place that they're ready to accept biogeochemical or whatever NOAA, big NOAA in quotes, needs is what we'd like to have transitioning in and getting tested in the test bed before it comes in. So I'm not sure if that's helpful or not, but I kind of just wanted to help remind people how the COMT fits into this WCOFS and biogeochemical game, and also where it could fit in the future. And I know Rick Ludick, I think he may still be on the line and might have a couple of words to add, but let me just pause there in case there's any questions or comments.
Hi, yeah, this is Samantha Sidlecki from UW. I was wondering if the next round of COMT might extend the, I know the current one is focused on chlorophyll and, you know, on like phytoplankton, zooplankton, partly to the but the other aspects of biogeochemistry like oxygen and OA and maybe even silica, like if there's interest in sort of moving towards those in the next round. And the second question would be if there's also if there's any interest in sort of extending the skill assessment between them to something that's more applicable to the end user decisions, like some metrics that are, you know, designed, you know, tailored with end users in mind.
Sam?
Yeah.
This is Chris. So there was no emphasis on chlorophyll. We basically got the models and compared it to the data that we had access to. So it's not as though we excluded anything. We tried to do analyses of both state variables and rate processes for which we had information. So, you know, I think the answer to your point is yes, although those comparisons, you know, to other state variables could be done now. If you know, there isn't really it wasn't intended to be chlorophyll only. We just took the information that we had the most data for.
Oh, okay. You don't
Go ahead.
to do more stuff with that, or you think you could do it even with what you have now?
I couldn't hear your question. It was garbled.
Oh, sorry. I was wondering if you didn't, so you think with the funding you have for the project that you could do that sort of assessment now?
Well, I guess the funding that we have now is directed towards implementing these in WCOFS. So if we choose to do additional assessment in the existing model, then we put off the WCOFS implementation, and probably the priority should be on WCOFS. But you know, if you have data sets that that would be useful for evaluation within that output, that would be great. So you know, Neil was involved in the selection of the comparisons, and he suggested that we emphasize the rate processes, and we did that at his suggestion. And you know, it would be great to compare to more pieces of information.
From my perspective as the WCOFS receiver, I'm highly interested in the chlorophyll because that brings in the satellite data piece clearly. But I don't stop there. I'm also looking at the ocean acidification question as a broad habitat issue, and clearly that has a significant impact on such things as the aquaculture, and so we have a definitive user base and with something that can be quantified or at least identified. And likewise with hypoxia, that brings in all the question of the oxygen, and so I don't really think they're separable, to be honest. I think we have to have the carbon cycle there. We have to have the oxygen and the nutrients. By the mere fact that we have a physical model, we'll be able to put in tracers for the non-reactive kinds of things like radionuclides if there's an incident or something like that, or an oil spill or something of that ilk. But if we look at the end pieces that we're trying to support, that pretty much gives us insight into what are the cycles, processes that we need to have in the model to address the breadth of those, because this is not a one-trick pony. It's got to be addressing the breadth of those pieces of ecological forecasting that we can begin to address now. Clearly, it's not going to be able to do everything. I don't expect that. But it's also something that could potentially evolve as we get either better data and or better understanding of how to represent things within the model.
Rick, patiently.
This is Becky. I just wanted to answer the other part of your question, and I think you asked whether there's an option to expand skill assessment to end users, and the answer is yes. I think we have broad flexibility to use the testbed however we want to work on what's needed most. And right now, NOAA seems to be the most interested agency in receiving what we're working on, and so we want to just try to meet their requirements.
From a practical sense, I know the West Coast Integration Project is, looking at several different models depending on the entity, Cascadia, et cetera. What I don't have a clear insight into is how do we narrow down to either a new model that integrates the pieces of those that are important, or do we just take certain processes out of them, or do we adopt one? Do we combine them in some section? Because they all have different strengths and foci, and that a simple NPZD model may not address the breadth of things we need, for example, like with ocean acidification. So what I need is the guidance from CompT efforts is, okay, how do we get the pieces, identify the pieces that we are going to collapse into for transition? Because I don't want 3 models that overlap showing up for transition at my door. Doesn't give me the end piece that I need. I can certainly come up with a decision and would, but that's not where we need to end up. We need to end up with the best optimal thing that addresses the breadth of the output that we need.
Eric, I think that's what CompT is doing.
Okay.
So, it's sort of in the middle of the we have an evaluation of 3 models in a single domain, and it produced results that have some value. And a next step would be a comparison within WCOFS, which is a higher resolution, more accurate physical model. And it's possible that the conclusions of one physical domain would be consistent with those in WCOFS, or it's possible that it'll be different. But I think at the end of the day, there'll be, a recommendation that's possible.
And that's good, and that's exactly what I appreciate. But as we identify how well it operates, in its existing domain, or then with the WCOFS, it has to also be evaluated against the objective of how well does this model, or does it even at all, support the ecological forecasting needs of NOAA, the hypoxia, the harmful algal blooms, the habitats, i.e. ocean acidification, and pathogens. And so there needs to be a bit of a, okay, this has a strength, this has a weakness, this has a gap, kind of analysis.
Understood.
I'd like to call on Rick. Rick Lutik's been had his hand raised patiently for a while here. Let's let him jump in.
Hello?
Guess he got so fed up he left. I think he's still there. Rick, are you there?
Unmute?
He was having problems with his mute earlier, so he was trying to get through, though.
Okay.
I don't know if is there a phone number he can call in?
Yeah, we can redistribute the number. Hold on one sec.
I don't know if he's on his computer audio or his phone audio, but if he's texting me, I'll let you know what he says.
Okay. All right. Well, why don't we just continue talking? Sorry to cut you all off.
I just wanted to say that the kind of metrics that I guess I was talking about were the ones that would have sort of ecological forecasting in mind. Like, for example, the timing and onset of hypoxia would be one I could think of, which might differ for the various models. Sort of the duration and spatial extent of a bloom might be another, or some more targeted metrics that way that you could imagine playing a role in or working towards a relevant decision making. I'm not sure that in 2013 when CMT started and you guys were initially starting those, designing those, that those kinds of things were really as prevalent as they've become, like in our group here.
This is a very important comment. I need people to recognize what she has just said, and that is helping us identify the user product. I mean, it's fine to have the model, but as we start looking at the outputs, what is needed out there, and along with that, who would be the user or target users? Ideally, there's user pull rather than us pushing, but sometimes it's a matter of saying we've come up with something new and you have to introduce it to people. So I recognize that. And this is where the regional associations can be immensely helpful to know as we identify the breadth of those kinds of products. And I heard several things today that I imminently see the value of. We haven't started approaching a way to produce those yet, but that's okay. It gives us a target to aim at, and then that helps define the model that we need to have in order to do that.
I also wonder if so within the testing that's going to be done within WCOFS, will they be done in forecast mode or in the hindcast setting?
I think it'll be done in a hindcast setting. You have to start somewhere, and WCOFS is a pretty big model, and it, I think, makes no sense to do any work in a forecast near real-time setting until you do some analysis retroactively.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Rick. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, good. Well, I just assumed before you didn't want to hear from me, but I think my computer audio, my microphone must not have been working.
We're glad you're back.
Okay. The one question I guess I would have, I thought the conversation's been great, and of course my interest is to make sure that the CompT is as useful as possible for the WCOFS, but also for the broader enterprise of end users as they're identified. There's one thing you can transition a model, and in that regard, the conversation between Eric and Chris was right on. Can you, at the hopefully, as we get to the end of CompT, there can at least be a recommendation that says maybe this model will meet these end goals, as optimally, and then maybe this other model might meet this end goals optimally. So there's one thing to transition a model. There's another thing to transition knowledge about how to run models better. And so I guess my question is, to what extent are we creating a knowledge base that will plug in, even if it's not ecosystem modeling, but even if it's just a physical modeling that will plug into the West Coast WCOFS?
Well, you bring up good points, Rick. It's actually both, and the way we get the knowledge base is in configuring the WCOFS development team. We initiated a technical working group that we try and pull together to focus on specific topics. We haven't met, that hasn't met recently, but there is a topic on the plate for it that I'll let Ed Myers, who's leading that effort, announce. I don't want to jump the gun on him. And so this is where we seek directly explicitly from the regional associations as invitees to the working group, how to address the issues and what are the strengths and weaknesses and approaches to consider and things to avoid, et cetera. So definitely there's a need for a knowledge base, and I think that's where you come into the core partnership that needs to happen between the regional associations and NOAA. And this is, in my mind, this is what IOOS is about. We don't have an artificial boundary between the two when it comes to a knowledge base, because this comes back also to O2R. How does the ops stuff that we do support the research on your end, as well as we learn from the research on your end? Clearly, from the perspective of the WCOFS, we need to, we're aiming to transition something on the biogeochem side as a pathfinder, and in the end, it may not be a full model, but we've learned which piece parts that we need to have and how those piece parts are done and how to combine them in an entirety that addresses what we need to get out of to support NOAA's mission stuff. But that's all part of the conversation to happen.
And so I guess I'm also specifically thinking about even some of the physical modeling, some of what Parker has learned working up in the Northeast or the Northwest, what Guy has learned from the operation of his physical forecast system, and to what extent there's lessons learned there that will accelerate the success and skill with which the WCOFS is operated.
The way I point to that, Rick, you're absolutely right. Let me start there. The West Coast Integration Project has a number of co-investigators, of which Alex is running our WCOFS, but he's also a co-investigator on the West Coast Integration Project. So the approach has been for him to coalesce those lessons learned from his partners in the West Coast integration effort that reports to CompT and capture those and integrate those into our learning.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This is Chris. I'll say an example of that that's already taken place was his ability to incorporate rivers through conversations with Parker. That was a super example of how we talk to each other and suggest best practices.
Hey, this is Alex. Yes, again, Parker, thanks for that help, and you and Sarah. And it's not just like they would provide field, but they would provide advice on how things may look like, and those everyday, I wish I could say everyday conversations, but at least we can communicate from time to time. That's been awesome. For data assimilation, I mean, to use close guidance from Andy Moore these days, and so CMT gives us tremendous motivation to work together. So I think it's been real fun that way.
My philosophy for this project is try to keep it as open as I can possibly imagine, and then figure out how to deal with all the inputs that we get. And so if there's things that I'm missing or connections that I'm missing, please let me know. I'm not parochial or trying not to be, and I realize that we need to leverage these days under the current budget environment.
Yeah, I think these days the cyber infrastructure visualization, I mean, I think CMT provides a tremendous opportunity for us to actually develop new fun products, and I think WCOFS provides tremendous opportunity for CMT to shine and make a real transition in terms of cyber infrastructure and visualization tools. And I know we do things slowly, right? Those people working on something, and there's still a lot of work to do. And I think to be really nice to see at some point WCOFS forecasts in this interactive environment in Google Earth, where you can make slices and comparisons, and things would work smoothly, right? And use opened up, so we don't have to carry huge files around, and you can basically change, kind of put information side by side. I mean, the sky is the limit there in terms of visualization and how you use cyber infrastructure tools actually as the a quality control tool, analysis tool, even for us developers, right? I think it's opportune time. So if you can make any progress in that direction, that would be awesome.
Clarissa here. I was just going to say, from the perspective of harmful algal blooms, and this might not have a direct influence on what we decide or what's decided in phase 2 for the biogeochemistry. But the first thing that we can start doing is getting those fields, and I know Alex, you and I have talked about that, but we can really start looking at WCOFS and seeing what the influence is on our model and our model performance when we start to switch to WCOFS. And certainly that will help us understand if we are going to meet the needs of our end users in the way that we have been. And I mean, a lot could argue we have not been meeting those needs with our current platform, but we could at least start to do some of those comparisons on our end and see what we can do, at least from the physical side of WCOFS, to give advice.
Yeah, that would be very helpful, especially as we move into the data assimilation side, if you're seeing improvements from the non-data assimilation to the data assimilation, because that bolsters our cost-benefit analysis and then gives greater weight to expending the resources on the additional computational time required by data assimilation.
Well, it depends on, I think we may find that different users may want products from different sources, right? For instance, for near bottom hypoxia, the non-DA model in places where upwelling, in places where dynamics are controlled by upwelling, downwelling in summer, right? Those places, even without assimilation, you can do pretty well if your initial stratification is correct. And placement of the minimum oxygen layer, right? As far as it concerns France, for fishermen or velocities for search and rescue for navigation, I mean, you have to assimilate, right? But assimilation at the surface can actually corrupt things to the bottom. So it's a huge, for me personally, it's still an open question, which one is better. So we need to run them side by side, and yeah, give us more CPUs and wall clock time. I mean.
I just want to clarify something. I know Parker said that about the oxygen in the Pacific Northwest, that it's controlled mostly by the physics, but I think he was just trying to say the local processes, and I know that, because he and I wrote a paper together in 2015 showcasing the importance of local biological processes on the drawdown of oxygen locally on the shelf in the Pacific Northwest. So it's not only the physics, part. Like if we ran the model with just the physics, we wouldn't get the hypoxia, as much as we do with it. I mean, the hypoxic layer is not connected to the offshore part, at least in Oregon and Washington. So it does develop locally on the shelf itself. So having the connectivity with the surface plume and the water column metabolism rate processes is important too. But I wanted to ask a question about WCOFS again, which is what the plans are. I know you guys are in the initial stages and haven't totally thought through these things yet, probably, but the plans were for conveying uncertainty. Is there a plan to do like a mini ensemble for these forecasts, or an ensemble of some kind, or
let me address that. At the initial time, no. But as we move into the unified modeling framework that NOAA is just now kind of taking a look at, we're aligning with a coupled system within the National Weather Service, and had a conversation with the lead on the implementation of the National Weather Service's unified modeling, the head of the Environmental Modeling Center, on Monday. And he's basically saying the direction that things are going is to have ensembles at each of the setups of scales to be addressed. But I currently don't see the resources to do that. We're struggling to get this particular model into the operational cycle because there's a finite number of flops on the computer, on the operational computer. So certainly for the near term, we're not going to have the capacity at the very least to have an ensemble.
This is Alex Kurapov. On its CMT side, my student is trying to actually combine this ensemble and variational methods. and we use the ensemble of model simulations, like of recent forecasts to compute the covariance for the initial conditions, right? Which can be important in places like Columbia River, for instance, where you say your salinity temperature relation strongly depends on location, for instance, right? And there are a lot of interesting issues that we didn't think in the beginning, which probably presentation is probably topic for future conversations. But I just want to say that some steps are being done, maybe on smaller scale, but using the same ROMS tool and doing it in the framework of 4DVAR as well. We are trying, right? But I agree, kind of this is given the cost of the thing, it's a bit longer term goal, right? In that regard, I should actually appreciate our collaboration with E and Bruce on the CMT, where they tried in some common field to try and ensemble variation of the simulation. A lot of issues have been discussed that emphasize importance of, say, for instance, how you localize the ensemble, how you actually generate the ensemble correctly, and so on. Back to you.
I only have one other comment, and then I'll stop so that we can go on. I know it's late, which is that I know you guys are thinking about where these things are going to be housed and sort of, what I didn't totally follow the diagram that you had, but my only comment about that is that I do see my own work a really vital connection between being close to the local regional observation centers and forecasting from there. Not only for the observations themselves, but the people working on them and like the fisheries scientists and stuff like that that work in the local waters. There is something about being geographically nearby to those, which I know currently is not how NOAA does modeling. They have it more, I understand they have it more centralized, but there is a benefit that I personally have from being close by to those labs.
In response to that, you make a very good point, and this is something that, as I put together this white paper, trying to take into consideration, because as I look at the white paper, clearly the analysis and product development and dissemination can take place, doesn't have to be centrally located, and that's why I've had on that last slide that I talked about, that if we have a centralized, for example, server that had the repository of, for example, model output, that then could be, talking about WCOFS, but I'm also talking in the more general sense of the entire ecological forecasting, that as needed, NOAA can take the data from that for its own products and produce those things that are done on a broad regional or national scale. But also our IOOS partners potentially would be able to access those data sets and then run them through whatever processing they do to produce their own localized output. And that way the partners and NOAA have a broader reach into the user community. These ideas are just kind of fomenting, and as we talk in terms of unified modeling, we're looking at this as broader than just modeling, but it's the entire modeling and prediction enterprise, and part of that is dissemination. And it's occurred to me, there's no one else I really haven't shopped this to anyone, but it occurs to me that, for example, instead of having a National Weather Service, a local National Weather Service office, that could potentially be a local NOAA prediction office, which could then be expanded to incorporate the variety of ocean-type forecasts, including ecological forecasts, in support of the local area. But that takes a fair bit of organizational and infrastructural modification, so how soon something like that would evolve, organizations are relatively slow, but it's also not the first time something like that has been proposed, so maybe as we move down the unified modeling path, that this is a chance to push that a little further down the road. So a lot more to follow on that topic.
This is Jan Newton. I'd like to chime in on that, on Sam's point and Eric, your response. I think a lot of times when people think of IOOS, they think of the observations and they think of the stakeholder connections, and they forget the modeling expertise that goes on. And I'm not saying this audience because we've just listened to a lot of that from our regional modelers, but I really want to underscore the point that Sam said in the unique position that regional modelers who maybe are not NOAA people but who work closely with the Regional Association and NOAA have in terms of being cited locally. And Sam said this, but I really want to underscore, she's a great example. There are other examples. I'm just going to abuse her right now because she brought it up. But, I've been in meetings where, she's meeting with tribal managers, with state managers, and asking them, okay, so now if the model predicts or forecasts this versus that, what is going to be more useful in the way you manage things? Or here's what we can do, and is this useful? Oh, no, it actually isn't. It's this. And that kind of connection that happens out here in the regions is just so valuable, and it comes from being able, and it's not just one meeting, right? It's regular meetings and going back and saying here's the product and that sort of thing. So I really want to make sure, Eric, that your conceptual model there is able to capture that, and I just wasn't able to follow all of the colors and symbols and exactly what they meant, but I think that is the unique capacity that the regional associations have, but that will require, if we want to sustain this, figuring out how to grow the model forecasting budget for such regional modeling efforts, because we're all kind of doing it on, like experimental and spin-up versus sustained.
Jan, it's just a spin on this side.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean to say, we need more money and you don't. I'm just saying that sometimes that aspect gets overlooked, and I'm glad Sam brought it up, and I just really wanted to harp on it a little because I've seen how effective it can be.
Yeah, and with regards to the conceptual model, I am all ears for ways of integrating what the IOOS regional associations bring to the table, everything from the observations, the modeling, the analysis, the outputs. I'm for that. I have to be a little careful because some of this is really completely outside of my domain of authority, so to speak. But since I'm writing a NOAA-wide white paper, I feel that I have a fair bit of standing to capture these kinds of things, and having a place, from NOAA's side, we bring to the table a number of the analyses and the modeling. It's how do we integrate the output from our side with the analysis and inputs and outputs on the RA side, and perhaps something through some common shared portals or links pointing in both directions on things. I don't know, and I would be very much interested because I'd like to capture some of that in this white paper that I'm working on, Jan. So if you have some thoughts, please, whether it's a flow diagram or places where, entities that need to be capturing certain things or providing certain things, I'd really like to know because I don't necessarily have all the answers. In fact, I know I don't have all the answers. In some cases, I don't have any answers at all. And so
But it seems to me an important way to accomplish this is, a conversation like we're having right now, and then maybe out of that envision. I heard several. Chris mentioned it, and maybe Samantha as well. Maybe we need to get a lock-in on a specific time period where there's WCOFS output, and then that becomes a common opportunity to do some testing, whether it's for the various carbon-based biogeochemical models or whether it's for the other models. Anyways, so in addition to just product creation, it's actually flexing a little bit the efforts that we're putting in to create capability.
I like that idea, and I've made myself a note here, making a test WCOFS data set available for
exactly
for exploration, I'll say.
Yeah. And the CompT can probably host that.
Yeah, I'm not going to. People may want to just do it in their own backyard.
No, but we could host the data set.
Oh, yeah.
Broadly available.
And I leave that to Alex, what data set he would provide. We can talk about that, Alex, on Friday. You're probably not going to be there because you're in Oregon State right now.
Yeah, I'll be back on Monday.
Okay, but at our meeting on Friday, or early next week, we can talk about what data set, because we can certainly put out a non-data assimilating data set now because we have some of those available. And then as a data,
I don't have a problem with setting the whole 6-year output daily averages from WCOFS anyway on opened up. So it's 2 terabytes. So anybody who wants to put it will have to send the disk drive to Colorado. You cannot
yeah. So what we probably want is another conversation that maybe focuses it down to a 6-month window or sometime when there's or 2 or 3 limited, things that are a little bit more manageable that then are more directly valuable from these add-on studies.
Yeah, I know we talked about that last August even, Rick. So and then we had this interaction with the CI people in September when we needed to put our Oregon model online, and they did put it online, but there were some loose ends that I hope they would fix before we kind of. I just don't want to ask them like 2 things at the same time. That's kind of how it goes, I guess. If you say
okay, well, I can help twist arms a little bit on what
because
prioritize.
At that point, the idea was that we put WCOFS there, and we can use the viewer to kind of look through it. But if the viewer doesn't have full capability yet, so like why would we bother to carry 2 terabytes around, right?
Yeah. If I could just jump in here, I think I also need to have a conversation with the IOOS program office to make sure that we're synchronized with them, and Becky and I can have a conversation there. I just don't want to step on any toes or going off in a direction that they're not prepared to support. I don't envision that's the case, but I do need to do some internal coordination here as well that will facilitate capturing potential alternatives for how ecological forecasting ops gets configured across NOAA.
But I do want to echo Jan's, Clarissa here, and just say that I think the IOOS RAs here will be a great test bed for the ecological forecasting roadmap, and we should really utilize that and come up with a plan. And I think she and I and SCCOOS can do that together and work with you on such a kind of pipeline.
Yeah, I'd like that because that directly supports the white paper that I'm working on. And even if we don't have, the plan is for beyond when the white paper's due, understanding what's in that white paper thoroughly and being able to share ideas and mold evolve how we think by the interaction, that would be really helpful. The target we're having for this white paper is we want to have it done and, signed off prior to the next annual meeting of our ecological forecasting roadmap, which is nominally maybe early May. So we probably want to have this done by early mid-April.
Okay. Well, if nobody has anything else to add, I think we can all sign off. And it was a really great discussion, at least from my perspective.
Thank you for putting it all together.
Can I say something? This is Pat Burke at Co-ops.
Yes,
yeah, Pat.
I've been listening to you guys, and I just want to. This has been very helpful. Me and Eric have been talking closely and working with Alex, and we will be hosting this model. Once the development is completed. But to the comments I'm hearing, 2 things that would be helpful for us in the near future would be one. There are a lot of uses for for this output once it's run, and understanding that we don't have control of that process, meaning once we've implemented this model into operations, there's very little opportunity for us to change it because it runs at the Weather Service. But for us, as the operator of the product, right now we're interested in the dissemination, something you guys are talking about right now. And for us, it would be helpful to understand is for you, what level of forecast accuracy are you interested for the parameters that will be provided from this model coming forward? So, what's more important, TNS versus currents, or currents versus water level? That type of stuff would be helpful. So that's the first point for something you guys to think about. Maybe working with Eric, you guys can provide that. The second thing is there will be a very large evaluation of this model once we get this up and running in a test scenario at the Weather Service. And there, I would encourage, however it's organized, but a list of POCs we could be working with to get this user evaluation off the ground, because that is a major requirement. Anything that we do put in operations needs to be evaluated by what I would consider you guys as a large stakeholder community. Not necessarily a typical NOAA community in terms of what our missions might be, but more, as you say, to these other needs. So those two things I think would be very valuable in the near term for us as we're working through these transition steps to get this off the ground. And I think from there, in terms of what Eric's Pathfinder is trying to develop, would be very informative.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate that.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think we're signing off. Is everyone good to go?
Hold on one quick second. I thought I just saw Steve Weisberg had his hand raised.
Did he have his hand? Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, I did, but actually some of the points I wanted to make were just made.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, everyone. We'll try to send out some kind of a summary on this and talks as well. If you're okay with sharing your talk, just let me know by email, and maybe we'll be able to disseminate some information to all of those who were online and those who weren't.
Yeah, it probably be easiest if you said something like an FTP site is set up that people can just download the presentations, because some of them are on the larger side.
Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Claire.
you. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Bye.
Bye.